Hello, I'm Fast Lawyer. Today we're finally going to review Grimlord VR, a game that was finally released out of early access December 19th, 2024 by developer Metal Cat Interactive. It normally retails for $30. I did receive a free Steam key through the Steam Creator Connect program to review this game, and I tested it out on the Meta Quest 3 using link cable on my RTX 3080. Grimlord is a dark fantasy action Souls-like RPG made from the ground up for VR. If you are a hardcore Dark Souls fan and a VR enthusiast like me, then this game is a must buy. It perfectly captures the essence, the challenge of a Dark Souls, but for VR gameplay. There is not a better Souls-like in VR, and in fact, Grimlord is my VR game of the year. And you guys know that I really do not hype up games at all. In fact, I think I'm known for criticizing games pretty harshly if they deserve it. I do not hold back on my reviews. I give you my honest take, the good, the bad, the ugly. Grimlord is definitely not perfect. There are several flaws that I noticed and I will mention in my review, but it is the greatest VR experience that I've ever had. So to me, it is the greatest of all time VR experience. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't have flaws. This is not From Software. It doesn't have that smooth, polished experience that many of you expect, especially after playing Elden Ring. But if you can forgive some of the jank and some of the bugs in this game, then I think you'll find that the gameplay here is revolutionary for VR. Some might argue that Blade and Sorcery has a better physics, and that may be true, but there is no better gameplay in a Souls-like experience than I found in this game. This is my review for Grimlord VR after 40 hours, and I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. And I will mention to you what I loved about this game, because obviously I rarely give such a high score, so I want to mention the positives, but I will also mention some of the negatives so that you can make your personal purchase decision at the end of the day, having accurate information, and that is what I strive for. So first of all, I do want to mention that I have over 40 hours in this game, and it took me about 35 hours plus to beat the game. I've heard of some people beating the game in 20 hours, so I would estimate that would be the range of the time it takes for most people to beat this game, anywhere from 20 to 35 hours. There are secrets in this game to figure out, and I did take the scenic tour of this game. After you beat the game, you do have New Game Plus to get into. Grimlord is running on the Unreal Engine 5.3, and with graphical settings set to high on my RTX 3080, I was getting mostly 90 frames per second. I did notice some frame rate drops here and there, but nothing serious. I have heard of some reports of some people having frame rate issues in this game, but I cannot account for that. I also did not experience any serious issues or bugs during my 40 plus hours playing this game, but I did encounter some minor bugs, which I'll mention a little bit later. You do have full locomotion along with smooth or snap turning. Teleportation is not available. You can play seated or standing, and there is auto height correction available. You also have magnet hands, so you can play comfortably seated, although I do think there is a slight advantage if you're standing, because this game involves a lot of arm swings and a lot of turning around, and that is just easier if you're standing wireless. There's also some comfort options available, and you can choose your dominant weapon hand, as well as whether you want the camera to track your controller or track your head movement or even your body. And while this game is mostly focused on combat, there's also some climbing involved, some platforming, and some sections where you're very high off the ground. So warning, if you're afraid of heights, this may not be the game for you, because there's some very scary sections where you're fighting enemies high off the ground and having to do some very high jumps. There's also some secret locations that you'll have to figure out how to get to. There's some puzzle platforming as well. There's also a little bit of a story here, but in true Dark Souls fashion, it's kind of esoteric, and a lot of the story details are from environmental storytelling, and a lot is left up to interpretation as well. But the meat of the game is the combat, and this is where either you will love the game or you might feel frustrated. Now, I enjoyed the physics of the game, and the more I played Grimlord, the more I enjoyed the challenge the developers were going for. At times, you'll be underpowered and enemies will be difficult, and you'll feel like combat is very slow, and you may wonder why certain things happen, like why is my weapon falling out of my hand, or Or why did my shield drop? Or why did this swing not cause any damage to the enemy? Or maybe you cannot tell that it caused damage. I'm not going to say the combat is perfect and that every swing registers perfectly, but after 40 hours, I am going to say it is the best combat system in VR, bar none. The thing is, this game has a lot of hidden depths to it that you may not realize it has. Each weapon has different damage and different weapon speeds, so you might just see the damage number listed and think that's all you need to know, but no, there's weapon damage type, and that can be pierce, slash, or blunt damage. And there's also magical damage if you want to get more complex, but basically all these different types of damages are effective against certain types of enemies and are not as effective against others. Just to give one example, blunt damage is generally effective against armored enemy. Conversely, an axe is very effective against enemies without armor. And if you look at enemies, there might be certain spots where they don't have armor that you can specifically target with an axe. And spears are generally very slow weapons, but they have a long range. And you know, with the pierce damage they do, you can really go around a lot of blocks by knowing where to attack. I personally found enemies with spears to be the most difficult enemies to go up against in this game due to that reason. There's also stamina, poise, block, parry, and dodge, and those will all affect whether you yourself get hit or not. And there's also weapon weight and your walking speed as well. So there's a lot of factors going on behind the scenes that you may not be aware of, but which affect how the fight goes. Now, blocking is actually pretty forgiving in this game. You do not have to be perfect with your timing or placement to get a block or parry. And if you plan your attack correctly, you should not get hit by most enemies. However, you cannot swing wildly in this game. It'll leave you open to attacks. And when you face boss fights, you'll have to position yourself carefully. You'll have to make quick reads of enemy boss attacks. And I felt no greater joy in VR than after beating Fidelixia and King Calier. They are two of the most epic boss fights in gaming. Now, there are some negatives, and if you saw my last video on Grimlord, you can see it for yourself. There is some jankiness to the gameplay at times, and you can see in my last video where my weapon gets stuck in the shield, or where I lose the weapons and I have to go back in town to pick them up from the goblin. Losing weapons on the floor that you have to go back in town to get, or losing potions, is pretty common in this game. And the enemy AI isn't always the best, and you can see in this game that certain enemies are alerted to your presence, but then they go backwards instead of helping out their ally, who now has to face you one-on-one. And there's just certain spots where enemies seem to have trouble attacking from. Now, I like most of the locations and I like the enemy variety for the most part, but there are some parts of the game that look rather generic, or where there's just not enough variety. Yes, I'm talking about the goblins. But there are several epic boss fights and amazing scenic locations. The amount of builds and weapons that you can use in this game is astonishing. They're all fun to mess around with. About the only issue I faced there was some of the magic spells wouldn't register. In particular, the lightning bolt one from the magic stage just would not register most of the time. I do like how easy it is to respec in this game and try different builds, and how the materials you get can be used for different weapons as long as you recycle them. Grimlord is my VR game of the year for 2024, and it is the best VR experience I've ever had. I will give Grimlord a 9 out of 10. I'm Fast Lawyer. This has been my review for Grimlord. If you found this video useful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, have a wonderful day. Goodbye.